Greetings to you and welcome to session 9 of John's Gospel. I'm Timothy Muse, lead pastor of St. Paul's Lutheran Church here in Alliance, Ohio, and it's a joy to be with you today as we spend this time continuing to walk through, wade into, and really kind of delve into this book, this incredible and powerful gospel written by John. If this is the first time that you're joining us, welcome to the series. I certainly would encourage you to go back and check out some of the prior episodes and sessions so that you can get caught up. We have been walking through this from the beginning up until this point, as well as having some background information. So I certainly would encourage you to check it out and find some of the previous episodes. You can find them on the YouTube page here that you connected to for this one. And it is really, it's good to kind of get that background information. And if you've been walking with us, welcome back. Welcome to the next session. It's great to have you here. We were on a little hiatus last week as I was doing some traveling, but we're back together again now, and we're carrying on in the sessions that we're working through. So it's great to have you here today. I certainly would encourage you to have a Bible open before you, whether it is a printed copy or a digital copy. That is your preference. That is your choice. And whatever translation you like to work with, whether it is the NRSV, which is what I'll be reading from, or a paraphrase like the Message or the Living Bible, or whatever works for you. As long as you have something open, as long as you have the Bible open before you so that you can read along, so that you can follow along in what the text says and what the Bible says. I've said this before, and I really do feel that it is completely accurate and true. You know, we think that we know what the Bible has to say, and sometimes we're accurate, but sometimes, you know, colloquialism and other things kind of get commingled together in what we believe the Bible has to say versus what the Bible actually has to say. So it's so important for us to make sure that we're connecting to the text, that we're actually listening to, paying attention to the text itself and reading through the words, because sometimes they can be pretty challenging. Sometimes they can challenge us to go in directions that maybe we didn't necessarily intend on going or believe that we were going to go. So we've been walking through this text. We've been walking through this story of Jesus, and we're very early on in the Gospels, which means that this is a time when Jesus is really laying out his credibility, his credo, his presence. Why should people believe him? You know, one of the things we need to keep in mind is that messiahs and soothsayers and healers and sons of God and sons of man, they showed up all over the place. They still do today. We've got a whole bunch of people with messianic complexity and proclamation. Just go to Las Vegas and see which one stands on the street corner. They'll tell you they're the Messiah. But, you know, in the ancient world, messiahs came along all the time. The people were looking for it. And some actually believed that they were, in fact, the Messiah. They actually believed that God had called them to change Israel and bring about a better world. So Jesus needs to separate himself. He needs to separate himself from the rest of the pack, which is what he's doing, which is why we saw, you know, kind of the water into wine, and we're going to see some other miracles and some other presents. But Jesus also needs to show that the Word of God and the salvation given to God through the Son isn't just for the Israelites. It's not contained into a country or a nationality. It is for the whole world. You know, and the Jews, they were very, very puritanistic in their understanding of bloodline. They were very nationalistic. Religion and nationalism were the same. I mean, you were a Jew not only as a citizen, but also as a follower of God. And they were very intent on protecting their nationalism. So the idea of a Messiah would only be for the Jews. The Jews would be the only ones that would get a Messiah. Who cares about the Gentiles? And even as we're seeing in the midst of the chapter that we're in right now, the Samaritans, who were Jews, but they were tainted Jews. They were barbarian Jews. They were Jews with half-breeds, half-blood. So the Messiah doesn't even come to them in the purest form. If you were to talk to the leaders of the temple cult, the Messiah comes to only the purebred Jews, only the Israelites who deserve that promise. Well, of course, we see that Jesus is not bound by some kind of Pharisaical understanding of God's providence. Jesus is bound by his call by the Father. So he is going to go to whomever God tells him to go, which would be the Jews and the Gentiles. And all four of the Gospels, the three synoptics and John, talk about this and see the explosion of the ministry beyond just the belief that Jesus came just for the Jews. So Jesus goes to everybody, everywhere. That's how this works out. So that's what we have. We have this understanding of Jesus coming as the Messiah, and he needs to build his credibility. Why should people follow? Why should people buy in? He's not going to compliment the ruling class. He's not going to give the ruling class props. He's going to challenge the ruling class to the point where they're ultimately going to execute him. So if he knows that he's putting his life at risk, then he's going to ask others to put their life at risk, and they need to know why. Who are they following? So this Jesus comes along as this messianic figure, but also the Son of God. And this is more than just some guy called from, the flock to lead. This is God incarnate. And the people need to see that. They need to know it so that they can sign on into the contract, if you will, and even go as far as giving their lives. So we're going to see that. We're going to see that challenge as this book continues to unfold. But right now, where we are with Jesus is we are with Jesus in foreign land, in Samaritan territory, which means that he is with the half-bloods. He is with the barbarians. In a lot of ways, Samaritans are worse than Gentiles, because Gentiles, they don't know anything. Gentiles are ignorant. And there's a big difference between ignorance and taintedness. You can be ignorant and still have some form of purity in that ignorance. But it's another thing to be tainted. The Samaritans are tainted. They're less than. They're half-breeds. And I know that we would never use this kind of language, or we should never use this kind of language in our modern colloquialism, in our modern interaction with people. We shouldn't treat people less than because of their lineage or bloodline. Not that I'm ignorant to think that we don't. But this was very clear and very pure in the ancient world. In the ancient world, bloodline was everything. So the Samaritans didn't deserve the promise of God, and yet here Jesus is. And not only is Jesus in the land of Samaria, but he is dealing with an outcast in Samaria. And we get glimpses of that from the last week when we saw Jesus being with this woman at the well at noontime. So she's there by herself, which is a huge risk for a woman nonetheless. But then she's also there midday when it's really, really hot, nobody around, because there's something about this woman. There's something about this circumstance that, remember, Jesus had to go here. That was part of the words that he said, is that he had to go through Samaria. Now, he didn't have to. He could have gone around Samaria just as easily as going through it. But he had to go through Samaria because he had to have this example, had to have this interaction. He had to show the Samaritans that God's grace was for them, too. He wanted to show them that the messianic promise was provided for them as well as for the Jews in Jerusalem and Judea. So he goes into Samaria, and while he's in Samaria, he chooses to interact with a very vulnerable person, an outcast, someone who actually, fascinatingly enough, when Jesus is interacting with her, she is the voice of tradition. She's the one who's asking Jesus why in heaven's name he is breaking tradition, when in fact she should be rejoicing that he is giving her voice. She should be rejoicing that Jesus is giving her identity, but in fact she's the one who, but she also knows that she could be putting her life at risk by interacting with this teacher. She knows that her place is such that she could be putting her life at risk. And so she's asking, why is it, how is it that someone of your stature, a Jew, is speaking to me, a woman, a man speaking to a woman, and a Jew speaking to a Samaritan? So Jesus chooses not only to bring the word of God and the messianic promise to the people of Samaria, but he doesn't go to the king, he doesn't go to the temple, he doesn't go to the place of meeting. He interacts with a woman, an outcast, at a very sacred site. And how do we know that she's an outcast? Well, we kind of think about it, but we need to look deeper into the story to find out for sure what's going on. So that's where we are at this point in time. So this is verse 16, chapter 4, John, verse 16. Now, John is the fourth book in the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. New Testament's in the back part of the Bible. And we are in chapter 4, which you can figure out, it's chapters like a book, 4, and it's beginning with verse 16. Jesus said to her, this would be the woman that he's talking to at Jacob's well, "Go, call your husband and come back." The woman answered him, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You are right in saying I have no husband. For you have had 5 husbands, and the one you are with now is not your husband. What you have said is true." The woman said to him, "Sir, I see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you say that the place where people must worship is in Jerusalem." Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me that the hour is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You worship what you know, you worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father seeks such as these to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." The woman said to him, "I know that Messiah is coming, who is called Christ. When he comes, he will proclaim all things to us." Jesus said to her, "I am he, the one who is speaking to you." All right, so first off, we find out very quickly why this woman is at the well at noontime by herself. Jesus tells her to go and call her husband. Now, Jesus knew what was going on. The fact of the matter is, this was the revelatory point that Jesus wanted to get to. He wanted to show that he had the capability of reading into people. This is one of the things about being the creator. You can read into your created. And Jesus is able to parse out, read into all this. He knows the depths of this woman. And in some ways, he is kind of baiting her into answering. But this would be a very common question. Jesus would understand social norms and interactions, and so it'd be a very common statement for him to say, "Go call your husband." Again, this is a patriarchal society, and in all essence, Jesus as a man shouldn't be talking to this woman. But he is, because he's breaking down rules and norms, but also he's parsing out why she is there by herself midday. What is it about this woman that is such an outcast? And in and of itself, for her to say, "I have no husband," is enough. You know, in the ancient world, women really didn't have a great deal of personal sovereignty. They were connected to the men in their life, their husbands, their sons, their fathers. They had power and dominion. They had place and status based on the men in their life. So a woman, if her husband died and she didn't have any children, her father was dead, and her relatives weren't willing to take her in, usually found themselves either living on the streets or prostituting themselves, because a woman was property in the ancient world. They didn't really gain sovereignty and agency until far later. And really, in a lot of ways, even here in the 21st century, after the crucifixion and resurrection, women still struggle with having sovereignty and agency in portions of their life, which I'm not going to get into because I think you know what I'm talking about. But the fact of the matter is, this woman is at the well by herself, and she says, "I have no husband." Well, that Jesus doesn't leave it there. He really needs to dig into it. He really needs to get real. He wants her to know that he knows everything about her. But even though he knows everything about her, he's still talking to her. He's still interacting with her. That's one of the things about the messianic truth. That's one of the things about the truth of God. We don't hide things from God. God knows everything about us. God is fully aware of everything that goes on in our lives, in our brains, in our thoughts, in our interactions, in our emotions, our feelings. God is present when no one else is. So God knows everything about us, and yet, even in the midst of our brokenness and pain, God still chooses to bend low. Jesus now is adding another layer to this woman's identity, or she's adding the layer to it, and it's not an untrue layer, it's just a very complicated layer. She says, "I have no husband," and Jesus says, "You're right in saying you have no husband, for you have had 5 husbands, and the one you're living with now is not your husband." So, I mean, you know, even in the modern world, we would look at someone who has 5 spouses and go, somebody likes to be married but doesn't like to be married. But here's a woman who's had 5 husbands. Now, what has happened to her 5 husbands? Well, legitimately thinking, they're probably all dead, because if she were to be divorced, then that would be a stain on her reality, unless she's moving from town to town again, and that didn't happen very often. So one would probably safely assume that her 5 husbands are dead, which then really draws the question of, you know, this there's nothing good, there's nothing wholesome, there's nothing of positive value for this woman. She's with her 6th man, and I'm not giving any kind of judgment on this woman's character. Don't hear that. I'm just looking at what the text says, and the text says she's had 5 husbands and she's on her 6th man. Whether her husbands keep kicking her out, whether her husbands are dead, what have you, there's nothing really good about where this woman is in her life. And it could all be circumstantial, and she's got nothing really to do about it. Again, no judgment. All I'm saying here is, all I want us to see here is that Jesus is paying attention to someone whom probably the rest of the world isn't paying attention to, which is why she's out there by herself at noon to draw water from the well. So Jesus is paying attention. Jesus isn't afraid of who she is, not only as a woman or Samaritan, but a woman who's had 5 husbands and now is working on her 6th. Okay. So all of this indicates a God who is not afraid. And when we come before God, when we bring ourselves to God, I think one of the things that we do as believers, even still today, is we want to hold back, as if, I don't want to bring this to God because it's too awful. Well, trust me when I tell you, my friends, there's nothing that's too awful for God. There's nothing that's going to frighten God. There's nothing that God's going to be like, oh, can't handle that. No, none of that is there. And Jesus shows us that. He shows us with his interaction with the Samaritan woman that he is not afraid to enter into the mess and the muck and the mire. And as we, move forward in this gospel, we're going to see more and more of that. We're going to see more and more places where Jesus is willing to enter into these broken places and bring hope, where he's willing to enter into the darkness and bring light. So Jesus reveals his ability to see into this woman's life, and immediately she starts talking about Jesus being a prophet. Clearly, we see that you are a prophet. You are a prophet. You can see into. God has given you the ability to see beyond just what is available. But then she turns it immediately to say, look, as a prophet, clearly you need to understand that the prophet of the Jews see us as secondary, second rate, less than. Our ancestors, they worshipped on this mountain. Our ancestors found this site to be holy. But you say that the place to worship must be in Jerusalem, that people must come to Jerusalem to worship. And, and that statement, we probably should, if we're listening to that statement clearly, we probably should hear that statement dripping with a little contempt and a little anger and a little hurt and a little disappointment, because the leaders of the temple did that. They didn't come out and say it, but they really made people feel that the true worship happened in Jerusalem, because only God resided in the temple in Jerusalem. God wasn't anywhere else. It was a mock. It was a representation to worship in the synagogue. If you truly wanted to worship God, you had to worship God in the temple in Jerusalem. So you had to come to Jerusalem. So her words were not inaccurate, except in claiming that this is what Jesus is going to say. Okay, but her words were not inaccurate, because the prophets of the people of the Jews, the prophets of the temple, they did say that true worship happens in Jerusalem. True worship happens on the holiest of holies and the holiest of holies and in this place. But then when you get to the temple in Jerusalem, you can't get in. You got to worship on the outside. This is all power play. This is what Jesus came to debunk and tear down. But what she is saying to Jesus is true, except the fact that she says, you say that the true worship must be in Jerusalem. Well, it's not me. Jesus is probably raising his hands going, look, lady, it's not me. I'm not the one who wrote these rules. My idiot followers wrote these rules. But nonetheless, okay, so Jesus goes on to say to her, now we're going down this frame, and this is where we need to go. This is what we need to talk about. We need to talk about the true presence of God. Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain or in Jerusalem. So worship is going to change again. And worship, being praise and thanksgiving and interaction with God, is going to change again. It's no longer going to be on a holy site on a mountain or in a holy city in a temple. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know. For salvation is from the Jews. Now, Jesus is being very clear that salvation is coming through the Jewish messianic prophecy. Jesus is a Jew. Jesus is a Jew all of his life. He's born a Jew, he's raised a Jew, he dies a Jew. And through him comes salvation. We're going to get to that later. So salvation does technically come from the Jews. Okay? So the salvation of God stems through the Jews. And really that is true even for today. However, there isn't a mandate that everybody has to be a Jew. Salvation comes from the Jews. You worship what you don't know. This is a statement of the mystery of God. This is not to say that you worship in ignorance, but you worship a God of mystery, a God who isn't revealed. Well, in the Messiah, that God is revealed. In Jesus, the face of God is visible. So he says, we worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming, and is now here, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father seeks such as these to worship him. So it is no longer, and here's the thing, here's the important part about this. Because in the Jewish realm, and really even a lot of times still in the Christian realm, and perhaps maybe I don't want to be stepping on any nerves, but I will. I mean, I'm not trying to, but I will if I have to. Worship is not just showing up at a place that someone says is holy and hanging out there for a while and leaving. That was worship in the temple cult. It didn't matter whether you heard the word or you got the word or the Spirit moved you. You just had to have yourself there. You had to be in the place, and then watch someone do the thing for a while and then leave. Whether you could understand it, whether it mattered to you or not, that was secondary. That was one of the things that that Luther when Luther was writing his Reformation theology and writing his sacramental theology and his theology of worship, that was one of the things he really challenged against, because it was believed that you just showed up in church. You didn't have to participate. You just sit there. You could do nothing. You could just watch. You could sleep. As long as you were there, as long as you were in the presence of, that was good enough. You didn't have to take the Eucharist. All you need to do was see it. All you need to do is look at it, put your eyes on it, and that was good enough. Well, that stemmed from a far earlier realm. That was the Jewish belief. As long as you showed up, as long as you were in the temple, you were golden. It didn't really matter whether you understood what was going on or the language that was spoken. You were just there. That was good enough. Well, Jesus, and the same is on a holy site. I mean, hey, I just got to go to a holy site. I mean, as long as I'm here at the holy site, it's all good. For those of you who don't know, the relic of John the Baptist's skull is contained in one of the chapels in Jerusalem, and you can go and you can touch it. And if you touch the skull of John the Baptist, I mean, then you're in really good shape. Well, it's kind of that thing. It doesn't matter about who you are. It just matters that you do what you have to do with some holy thing. Well, Jesus is kind of throwing all that on his head, because it does matter. It's not just about going to a holy place. You can be a scoundrel or wicked and go to a holy place. It does matter. Spirit and truth. True worship of God doesn't come from being in a place. It comes from having God inside of you, being part of what God is doing. And trust me when I tell you, I have been a pastor for over 22 years, ordained for over 22 years, but I've been doing public ministry for probably closer to 25. And I've been in the Lutheran Church for 51 years. In my half century of involvement in the Lutheran Church, I've seen a lot of people who sit in the pew on Sunday morning but are not representing the work of God. They are there stamping their ticket to make sure that God sees them, but there's wickedness in their hearts and there's brokenness in their words. And there's intentionality of tearing others down. I see it all the time. I pretty much see it every Sunday when I'm here. For those of you who aren't aware of that, I'm sorry to hear that. But I preach about it pretty often because it's important to know. You can't just show up to a place that's holy and be a scoundrel or wicked and expect that, it's just all good enough, like God is fooled or mocked or made fun of, or that God is required. And that was the thing. I mean, it was believed that God was required to bless you if you came to the temple in Jerusalem because you were in the temple in Jerusalem. That's not how it works. And Jesus is here to debunk that. He's like, look, woman, it's not about whether you're on this holy mountain or in Jerusalem. If you're a scoundrel, if you're not worshiping in your heart, if you're not coming before God in joy and presence, then you can be whoever you want to be, and it's not good enough. It's not good enough. It's about praise and thanksgiving. It's about joy and connection. So, Jesus, again, Jesus has come to rewrite the script. So the salvation of God comes through the Jews because Jesus is a Jew, but that Jew is in the broken land of Samaria, and he is tearing down the whole structure of power and connection and money making. Remember, it wasn't long ago that he, took a whip of cords and drove the animals out of the temple and turned over the table of the money changers. Jesus is taking away the power of those who oversee the temple. He is returning the presence of God to where it belongs, and that is in the hearts and the minds and the lives of the people. So he says, the true worshiper is the one who's going to worship in spirit and truth, which means you can worship anywhere. If you're worshiping in the synagogue, if you're worshiping in the temple, if you're worshiping out in the local chapel, you can worship anywhere. And really that is true again for us today. Now, yes, there is great power and guidance in coming together in community for worship, and God does call us to that. But community can gather in a park, at a stream, can gather at a restaurant or a brewery or wherever two or more Christians are gathered in the name of Christ. So we see that very early on, that Jesus' mission is to explode this beyond just the temple or the synagogue or whatever happens to be in control in the moment. So he goes on, God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. God is spirit. God is everywhere. God is alive and active. Again, keep in mind the vision of God in the Old Testament. The vision of God in the Old Testament was God sitting in the Holy of Holies, that God was sitting there, all wrapped up in a little box, and everybody had to come to God. But what Jesus is saying is God is spirit. God is formless. God is everywhere. God is ever present. We start to see this idea of omnipresence and God being everywhere and God being alive and God being active, rather than God being stifled behind these huge curtains, which again, if you're in control, it makes perfect sense, doesn't it? I mean, if you want control, then you say that God is in that closet, and I'm the only one that can go into that closet, and you can't look in that closet, because if you look in that closet, you're going to die. But I can look in that closet because I'm special and I'm important, and God's not going to kill me. So if you want something to say to God, you give it to me and I'll take it to God. No, and by the way, it's going to cost you. That's how the temple cult worked. That's what the priests ultimately came to. It's not how it was originally designed, but that's what they ultimately came to. That's what power and greed does. It corrupts. It makes good people do bad things. It makes smart people act dumb. So what Jesus is saying is, look, this whole God thing, no, it's not in the temple and it's not on the mountain, and God isn't relegated to holy relics and holy places. Not that you can't worship God in holy places and holy relics, and that's not the point. God isn't being removed from them, but God is being freed from just being in them. God is being freed from just being in the Holy of Holies in the temple. And when we get later on down, we get to the crucifixion, we're going to get a symbolic action that will happen, that we'll talk about. Hopefully I'll remember talking about it when it comes to it, but usually I do when I come to that portion of the story. So the woman said to him, I know that Messiah is coming, who is called the Christ. When he comes, he will proclaim all things. So here's the fascinating thing. I mean, even though these are half-breeds, even though these are barbarians, even though these are tainted blood people that the Jews don't want to interact with, that the Jews don't want to have anything to do with, they still hold on to the promise of the Messiah. They still hold on to the promise of God that comes back from the prophet Isaiah. So they know their history, at least this woman does, which is really kind of fascinating, because one would think that this woman wouldn't be this connected and energetic and knowledgeable, but yet she is. I mean, maybe that was the price. Maybe that was the benefit of being married to so many different men. She got so much different wisdom. Again, because girls didn't go to school. Girls, they weren't taught to read. They weren't in synagogue. They were told to sit in the back and be faceless and quiet. So this woman at the well, she knows a lot, and Jesus has given her a whole lot of room. He is allowing her to speak, which is another aspect of God that I think we kind of miss, is that our God is willing to listen to us. Our God is willing to let us speak. Our God doesn't speak over us. Our God is willing to let us get out what we need to get out, challenge what we need to challenge, question what we need to question. Our God's not afraid of that. Our God's not afraid of our questions. Our God's not afraid of the divine place on the throne. None of us are going to overthrow God. So God's like, yeah, ask whatever you want to ask. Because I'm not afraid of it. Go ahead. I don't care. Fire away. Fire away. So the woman says, I know that Messiah is coming. Now, this prophecy was given over 1,000 years ago before Jesus shows up, but she's holding on to the prophecy. She knows, and she knows what the Messiah does. When he comes, he will proclaim all things to us. He will tell us all the truths. So she's well aware of what Messiah is and what the Messiah will be. And this is the first time that Jesus, now and picture this, imagine this now, my folks. Jesus is talking to an outcast, a Samaritan, a woman by himself at the well, and the first time that he truly proclaims himself to be the Messiah is to her. Not to the disciples, not to the king, but to her, to this woman, this nameless woman. She is the first one who Jesus outright says, I am the Messiah, because she says, when he comes, he will proclaim all things to us. Jesus said to her, I am he, the one who is speaking to you. I am he, or just I am. Okay, so if you know your Old Testament, when Moses asked God, when Moses was getting ready to go down into Egypt, and Moses said, God, who do I tell sent me? Who do I tell the people sent me? And God said, I am. I am sent you. That's God's name, I am. Or in some translations, I am I. I am sent you, sent to free your people. So then as we look at Jesus, the Son, the second part of the Trinity, same stuff, Word made flesh. In some translations, it is just I am the one who is speaking to you. And not I am the one who is speaking to you. I am, comma. That's a whole statement. I am, comma, the one who is speaking to you. So the one who is speaking to you is the description, is the connection to the I am. It's defining who the I am is. So Jesus is using the very same words. And if this is someone who knew their Old Testament, their Jew, immediately they would have pinged, boom, wow. Okay, God said that to Moses, and now you're saying that to me. Maybe I need to think about this. Maybe I need to put this in some deeper perspective. So Jesus identifies himself. He identifies himself as the Messiah, as the I am, as the presence of God. And it's to this unnamed, unknown woman, this outcast. Imagine this. Here is the temple cult in Jerusalem, and they're waiting and watching, and they're the ones that have questioned Jesus when he overturns the money tables in Jerusalem. Give us a sign. Who are you? Tear this down. I'll build it up in 3 days, blah, blah, blah. He doesn't say to them, I am the Messiah. He just pushes them. But he identifies himself to this woman, to this unnamed, unknown woman. How incredible and powerful is that? All right, so while this is happening, just then, this is verse 27 now, just then the disciples came. They were astonished that he was speaking with a woman, but no one said, what do you want, or why are you speaking to her? Then the woman left her water jar and went back to the city. She said to the people, come and see a man who told me everything I have ever done. He cannot be the Messiah, can he? They left the city and were on their way to him. So Jesus has been out by the well by himself. He's interacting with this woman. The disciples went into town to get food. They come back out and they witness this encounter. They witness this encounter. They see what's going on. They're confused because this goes against every social norm. They were probably apprehensive about going to Samaria to begin with. They didn't want to go to the town of Sychar. They didn't want to go into barbarian land, half-blood land, half-breed land. They didn't want to go hang out with these people. They would have preferred to walk around or stay in, the metropolitan Jerusalem, where, things were far better. They didn't want to do this, but here they are now in the city buying food, and they come out, and here's Jesus talking to a woman. Oh, for the love of Pete. Somebody should have stayed behind to handle this guy because he's going to screw everything up. But nobody had the courage or the stupidity to ask Jesus what he was doing. That's kind of the fascinating thing. We don't have a place in this world to ask God necessarily what God is doing. We can ask why things are the way they are, and maybe we'll get an answer, maybe we won't. But more importantly, the question should be, how can I be part of what you are doing? Because what you're doing, you're God. I mean, none of the disciples bothered to ask Jesus, what are you doing, or why are you talking to her? They clearly understood that Jesus knows far more than they do. So they probably should just back off and not try to be the gatekeepers, making sure that Jesus does all of the appointed and appropriate things. Jesus doesn't do appointed and appropriate. That's not his way. His way is faithfulness, messianic fulfillment, even if that doesn't look like it's the way it's supposed to. So the woman left, and notice what it says. Then the woman left her water jar and went back to the city. She went out there to get water, but she didn't even bother to take the water back. What a wasted trip when it comes from a water perspective. At least she could have filled her jar and went back. But she was so excited to go back and tell the people, come and see. This is classic evangelism. Come and see. Come and witness for yourself. I can tell you all day what happened, but you need to come and see it for yourself. I can tell you until I'm blue in the face what an apple tastes like, but you need to bite into it for yourself. Come and see. Come and see a man who told me everything I have ever done, who opened me up like a book, who read me word for word and didn't shame me, didn't assault me, didn't embarrass me, didn't tear me down or judge me, just told me everything I'd done. He couldn't be the Messiah, could he? He couldn't be the chosen one, could he? The Christ, could he? I mean, part of the messianic promise was that the Messiah would be able to read situations and people. So it's well within the messianic power. But, I mean, the Messiah is not supposed to show up at a well talking to an outcast woman in the middle of the afternoon. So clearly something's going on here, but this doesn't look like the Messiah. So her question is kind of semi-rhetorical. He couldn't be the Messiah, could he? But it's not completely dismissive. It's a negative way to make a positive statement. And you know what? And for people who experience divorce or abuse, maybe not divorce, abuse, or shame or scorn, or grew up in abusive circumstances, that's a powerful way of getting something. Rather than saying, I'm hungry, can I have something to eat? It's, are you going to finish that? Or, wow, that looks tasty. Is there any extra? Are there any leftover? So it's kind of a roundabout way of asking a question. Well, rather than the woman coming down and proclaiming, I met the Messiah, which she could have, she came down and says, come and meet a man who's told me everything I've ever done. He couldn't be the Messiah, could he? It's possible. It's possible that he is the Messiah. It's possible. They left the city and went on their way to him. So they listened. So, I mean, apparently this woman isn't as outcast as we kind of let on, because people listen to her, or she's willing to be vulnerable. I mean, everybody knows about her. Everybody knows what she's done. I mean, she's probably one of the town gossipies, who people gossip about is what I mean, not one who's going around gossiping. She's probably one that gets talked about often at the beauty shop and at the water cooler. So for her to come and be vulnerable and say, I'm someone who knows everything that I've done, everybody knows what you've done. But let's go see what's going on anyway. Let's go see if this guy is actually the Messiah. So off they go. They leave what they're doing and they head off to meet this guy, Jesus. All right, so my friends, I'm going to leave it here for now because we've got another big section. See, there's a lot of stuff that's coming out of these stories, and I want to make sure that we give them due credit and due point. So I'm going to leave it here. We'll pick up next time with the disciples' response, and then the interaction with the Samaritans and everything that Jesus ultimately comes to. If you have any questions or thoughts about this and you need or want to make a comment, my contact information will be up at the end of the program. If this has been helpful for you, if you have found benefit in this, I would encourage you to share this episode. Share this episode. Share the other episodes. Share them on your Instagram feed. Share them on your Facebook feed. I know that the church, when these are published, they go up on our Instagram account, up on our Facebook account. So if you don't know how to do it through YouTube or what have you, just go on to the church's social media, the Facebook or the Instagram or the Twitter, and just click on share or retweet or whatever, and your followers will see what you're seeing. And it's so important. That's how social media works. That's how we get this message out there. That's how we get this word to those who don't have it. So if this has been helpful for you, then share it. Share it with others so that others can experience the grace of God that we get. Hey, I hope you have a great day and a wonderful week, whatever it brings for you. And we'll talk to you again next time. Again, God bless you. And if I can do anything, reach out to me. I look forward to next week and where we go from here. Take care. We'll talk again soon.